We're going to get started with the message today. I titled it, if Casey can put up the title slide there, and then I can control the rest of them. It is the joke that launched the church. I have to set the premise of this joke for us to fully appreciate how funny I think it is. And so we need to place ourselves, situate ourselves, and get ready for this joke. So we are in Jesus' third of 5 discourses. Matthew is recreating the First Testament with Jesus at the center. Moses had 5 major segments in the First Testament, so Jesus is going to get 5 major segments in Matthew's gospel. This one is the middle segment, and it is the core of Matthew's gospel. Last week, we started with Matthew 13, going into the second part of Matthew's gospel. It's the church book. Matthew 1 through 12 is all about Jesus, and I like what Bruner calls it, the Christ book. I've pointed out before how Hebrews, the writing style, it produces these bookends within the writing that allow us to find the divisions that Matthew built into his work. Often we can miss Matthew's divisions because someone added chapters and verses, and it wasn't quite how I would have liked it to be, but whatever, we work with it. And so Matthew has these bookends, and we've pointed out several times how they divide his book. And in case you missed the bookend from last week, Matthew's gospel opens with Jesus' genealogy, making the point that his family has always included Jews and Gentiles. His family has always included all of humanity. Jesus' family up to his birth is more inclusive than simply Jewish genetics. That opens the Gospel of Matthew. And as Matthew closes his focus on Jesus, Jesus makes the point of who his family really is. He says, "Who are my brothers and sisters and mother?" He said, "It's all of you who join me and do the will of God and come into the family." The family is open to all. And so we open our focus on Jesus and we close our focus of Jesus to look at his broad family. And on the closing bookend of family, it sets up the transition to moving from the person of Jesus to the people of Jesus, the church, his family. We're going to continue to find these intricate details of Matthew laid out in his gospel. We may get a chance to explore it later, but I'll at least point out an interesting bookend that we will find in the church book of Matthew. It opens with Jesus speaking of the secrets of the heavenly kingdom. And as we close the church book of Matthew at the end of Matthew's gospel, it will close with the dark secret of the earthly kingdom. And so secrets bookend and open and close the church book of Matthew. So as we come to today, though, I want to remind us of how much we're learning to read the life of Jesus and how to read Jesus' words with much more attention to detail than we may have been taught in the past. It changes some very important passages for us when we learn to read Jesus as a good rabbi, an amazing rabbi. And this means that he is helping us to gain wisdom, not just the right answers. Before we got to the core of Matthew's book in this parable section, he has given us tools to help us dissect what Jesus says. I'm going to attempt to equip you with a couple of tools as we go into the joke. And then we're going to come to the key verses of Matthew 13. We equip ourselves first by going all the way back to the Sermon on the Mount. We have this passage in Matthew 7. See if it'll work here. There we go. Where people are approaching Jesus through their good actions, and Jesus tells them to leave him. He never knew them. It says, "On that day, many will come to me and say, 'Lord, Lord, look at all the great things we did.'" Taken at face value, this verse was used in my past to scare the hell out of me. It can look like I'm doing the right thing, but you never know if you're really going to get turned away. Are you going to have the door slammed in your face? But then it never made sense to me that Jesus could tell anybody that he never knew them, because Jesus also revealed that he models a father who so intimately knows everybody, he knows how the number of hairs they have or do not have on their head. Jesus' life supports numerous passages through Scripture that every human being is intimately known by God. And if Jesus is the creating force of God who creates by his word, then Jesus knows every person intimately because Jesus has spoken them into existence. Upon further examination, we realize that there is a great focus in Matthew chapters 5 through 7 upon not being a hypocrite. Hypocrites were actors who would literally or figuratively put on a mask to be something they are not. And Jesus speaks a lot in the Sermon on the Mount about not being a hypocrite. Don't wear a mask of someone other than simply who you are. In context, we realize then who Jesus is saying he turns away because he never knew them is the actor that I portray. Jesus says that when I come seeking to be known and acknowledged based upon the act that I have put on in my life of what really might be some good things. When I want to be known by them, when I come to Jesus as the character, Jason, the mighty worker, I am coming as my false self. And it is out of mercy that Jesus turns away my false self, lest I be encouraged to believe that my worth to him rests upon what I can create in my value and worth through whatever I do. It's like Tim Allen trying to get into heaven as Buzz Lightyear. Buzz is a fake person. And if Tim Allen comes and says, hey, I'm Buzz Lightyear, Jesus says, I never knew you. I don't know you. You aren't what I spoke into being. So, as I take my mask of all my good works, and I come to Jesus and I slap my mask on, and I say, Jesus, here are several of the good things I've done. This is me. This is me. Jesus looks and he says, I never knew you. Go away. And so that one goes away. So I'm like, I'm confused. And I try masking up again. Okay, Jesus, here's all the good, here's the charity that I did. Here's all the charity that I did. This is me. This is me. And Jesus says, I never knew you. And that one goes away. And another one goes away. And Jesus keeps sending my masks away. And finally, I look at my masks that aren't working. And I look at them. And I set them all aside. And I throw my hand up. I have run out of my selves to present to Jesus. And I come again to Jesus and I say, I give up, Jesus. I'm Jason who you made. I'm Jason who messes up. I'm a plain guy who did get to do some good things in my life, and I did some bad things too. And Jesus says to the real me, Jason, I know you. I spoke you into existence. I have sent away all the false selves, and I have uncovered you. And he embraces me. What we learn from the skilled teaching of Rabbi Jesus is not that this passage is about sending someone to hell. It is a lesson about how Jesus will not let us be trapped in our false selves. They are not what Jesus made. Notice who gets sent away in this passage. The fake me. Notice who doesn't get sent away. The real me. Genuine me is still standing in front of Jesus being unearthed as he sends my fakes away. He does this because we've talked time and time again about how Jesus did not come to save us against them. He came to save me from me. And so he is saving me from all my selves, plural, and he keeps sending them away until he reveals me. And the Jason under it all who was told, you aren't good enough. And it fractures into 101 of my own voices in my own head, telling me I'm not good enough. I need the mask. The Jason underneath is finally brought forth. The Jason named by myself, not good enough Jason. Not good enough Jason emerges to meet the safe, gentle hands of Jesus, who says, you've always been my favorite version of Jason because you're the one I made. You're the one I made and declared it is good. So we take that from the Sermon on the Mount, and then we move on to Matthew 10:33. But whoever denies me before others, I will deny before my Father in heaven. Again, this passage was used to scare the hell out of me. But we looked at this one and we realized that the words for deny here is really to contradict or oppose. And it really reads, whoever opposes me before others, I will oppose their opposition before my Father in heaven. Whoever contradicts me, I will contradict their contradiction. And I will continue to claim them before my Father in heaven, even when they don't claim me. We know this is how it is meant to be read because Paul later quotes this in one of the earliest church creeds in 2 Timothy 2:13. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. He opposes our opposition. Why? Because he cannot deny himself. It is who he is. Aside from learning that Jesus never stops advocating for us, the lesson from Jesus' words in Matthew 10:33 is to pick up on Jesus' use of double negatives to make a positive. In your negative contradiction, I will negatively contradict your contradiction. This is something in rabbi speak we might call contradicting contradictions. It's a tool that Jesus uses, and so we carry this and we equip ourselves from the Sermon on the Mount and from this passage in particular. We equip ourselves to see that Jesus talks like a good rabbi in challenging words that make us think deeply. And we see that Jesus wants to engage with the real us. He wants to get a chance to see who we really are. And for us to see who we really are and who really matters. And we get a chance to see one of the uses of Jesus' contradicting contradictions. So we dive back into Matthew 13 this week. And we get a chance to see what I think is a pretty humorous engagement with Jesus. Jesus has the power of the mob ready to be unleashed. And he doesn't take advantage of it. He just spoke about how he was grateful to not marry the message of the gospel with the power of the religious leaders. He was grateful that the message was going out to the common man, not being co-opted by the religious leaders of the day. And now, after bypassing religious power, the power of the common man is placed in Jesus' hands. And he goes to tell parables that confuse the crowd and drive them to think on their own, rather than speaking to the crowd mind that runs on simplicity and instincts. If you want mob power, the last thing you want to do is give people something to ponder, because that unplugs their mind from the crowd. You might gain a few intellectually, but you will lose the masses. You will lose the mob. Well, parables take a lot of pondering, and crowd momentum is being lost. And what we're going to see is the disciples realize what's happening, and they don't understand why Jesus is doing this. As Jesus wraps up the parable of the field with the sower who is throwing out seed onto 4 different kinds of soil, Jesus says, if you have ears to hear this with, hear it. This might best be rephrased, if you are equipped to understand, then understand this. This call is Jesus saying, if you have grown the right spiritual ears, you will understand what you are hearing. We considered it last week that in a Jewish parable, what we should be hearing in a parable is a call to wisdom through wrestling with the parable. There's not always an answer. Parables are meant to stir our minds. I like how I put it one time, or how someone put it one time. Jesus tells people parables to throw them off their game. So let's watch the game of the disciples. Right off the bat, the disciples don't have the ears to hear. They're not equipped to understand what it seems Jesus means for them to understand. But as they're loath to do, they don't want to reveal their own lack of understanding. They don't want to embarrass themselves by exposing what they don't get. So they put their mask on and they turn their misunderstanding towards the crowd. And they say in Matthew 13:10, then the parables came to Jesus and they asked him, why do you speak to them in parables? This is the first question that Matthew records the disciples ever actively asking Jesus. I believe this is deliberate by Matthew for many reasons. All this time, Jesus spent all this time with his disciples, and his own disciples have never asked a question to this point. They do now, but it isn't the question they should be asking because they don't want to show their ignorance. They should ask, teacher, we're not understanding, so how do we get the ears to understand? How do we get the understanding we need to understand? They don't ask the right question. Instead, they ask Jesus about the crowd. They gloss over themselves. To me, this is where things start to get funny because the naive students believe they're going to pull a fast one on their rabbi. If we just direct him to the crowd and we gloss over us, he won't see our shortcoming. Let's put his focus over there. There's a lot spoken in such a short question. In what is said and unsaid, here is the disciples' question. Jesus, all right, the crowd is not understanding the parables, and you are missing the chance to light off this revolution. We get it totally. That's why we're glossing over us, because we don't have any questions about it. We get it totally. So don't worry about us. But we're worried about you. We want to see you succeed in overthrowing the Romans, and the parables just aren't cutting it. We enjoy them. But this crowd is so stupid. They aren't getting it. We understand these things apparently better than you. Because you don't see that the parables aren't working. So why are you telling parables to them? The question is many things. It's an attempted redirect of their rabbi as they see mob power slipping through their fingers. It is also an us-them question. By making the crowd the problem with understanding and glossing over themselves, the disciples seek to stay in the circle of Jesus. By not drawing attention to their own lack of understanding, they would place them with the crowd. The question is also the disciples putting on the false self mask of a hypocrite, as they hope that Jesus will believe they are smart if they omit their lack of understanding. They put on the mask because they believe their relationship with Jesus is grounded in merit. And they dare not lose value by exposing their struggle. I love picturing Jesus' disciples sweating as they hope he will buy their question. We hope he'll just pass us over and he'll go to the crowd problem and he'll change from the parables and we can kick this party off and kick the Romans out. So they're sweating. Is he gonna take the bait? Jesus responds to them in Matthew 13:11. Jesus says, To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it's not been given. You can imagine the disciples' relief when Jesus buys it. And Jesus draws the line just where they wanted it. You, my disciples, are so special. You are wise to the secrets of heaven. You're in my special circle. The crowd, not so much. They aren't special. You have. You, my disciples, you have. They, the crowd, they don't have. Human nature wants to be in the circle of the haves, the circle of the privileged. And in hiding their lack of understanding, the disciples have preserved their place away from the commoners and with Jesus. So Jesus goes on in Matthew 13:13. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they don't perceive, hearing they're not listening. This really means that they're not understanding. They're not getting it. And we can imagine the disciples covering up their own lack of understanding as Jesus is saying they're not getting it, and they're saying next to Jesus, yeah, those idiots, and they want to feel like they're on Jesus' side. And they say, Jesus, you're right, they're idiots. This is what we're saying. So stop telling them parables and speak to them like idiots. Let's rule this mob. Jesus continues in 13:16 through 17. But blessed are your eyes and your ears, for they hear. Your eyes see and your ears hear. Truly, I tell you, many great people have wanted the chance to understand what you are understanding. You are amazing. Can you hear Jesus just layering the guilt on thick in this? He's slathering it on. He knows they aren't seeing. He knows they aren't hearing. He knows they aren't understanding even when they think they are. In a second, when we get through the parables, he's going to ask, have you understood all of this? And they're going to say, yep. And then in a few more chapters, Peter's going to tell Jesus what Jesus is going to do. You're not going to go to the cross. A little later, most of his apostles will abandon him as he does die on the cross. And after Jesus is dead, his disciples will huddle together in befuddlement because they didn't actually have the secrets of the kingdom. Their eyes are not seeing, their ears are not hearing. Jesus knows they are not understanding, but he is building them up for a multi-pronged lesson. As Jesus builds it up, though, you have to wonder if at least one disciple starts sweating. He starts sweating at how much acclaim Jesus is now laying on them. First, they were sweating as to whether or not Jesus would take the bait and just gloss over their misunderstanding. But now, maybe one or two are starting to sweat at just how hard Jesus is buying what they tried to sell. Jesus is saying, I've been blessed with such great disciples. It's students who I really don't even have to teach. This is great. I thank my Father in heaven. He gave me such wise disciples and not people like that crowd over there. At what point do you realize you may have made a mistake in attempting to present yourself as something you're not, like these disciples did? At what point do you start sweating that someone bought what you were selling just a little too hard? So the disciples are sweating bullets as Jesus is building them up. You're amazing. And there's a key verse in the middle of his building them up, for we get a saying that is also very often used abusively and to scare people. But if you read it correctly, it is one of my favorite sayings of Jesus. Matthew 13:12. For those who have, this is Jesus talking, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But for those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. Knowing about Jesus' contradicting contradictions, do you actually hear what Jesus is saying here? I love this. This is one of Jesus' contradicting contradictions. Jesus says, when I find you with nothing, I will take away your nothingness. I will give you something. To those who have understanding, Jesus says, that will be built on with more wisdom. And to those who have nothing, I'll take your nothingness away. And then you'll have something. And we get to build on that too. Now the disciples are really in trouble. They've hidden from Jesus that they have nothing. How do they now reveal it? I like to imagine that there was at least one disciple who had originally argued before they went to Jesus with the first question. He argued that honesty is the best policy, guys. Come on, honesty is the best policy. And now he's realizing we should have been honest, because if we were honest with Jesus that we had nothing, he would have taken it away and given us something. But as he hears Jesus buy into the fact that they have something, what they tried to sell him, the disciple kicks the one next to him who convinced him to go along with this. And he says, I told you we should have been honest about understanding nothing, because then he would have known we had nothing and he would have given us something to build on. We've messed it up. But we can't stop now, because how do we now tell our teacher that we tried to deceive him? He's really going to kick us out then. The punchline to the joke hinges upon this line, so I'm going to go back to it and leave it up. Matthew 13:13. So having built the knowledge required, I can now tell the joke with the punchline. Here it is from the top, as I picture a perspective of one of Jesus' disciples. Jesus' disciple is hanging out with another one who he has created, he has brought into the church, and he's telling his own disciple, he's reflecting back on his time with Jesus, and he's like, dude, did I ever tell you about the joke that Jesus played on us when the church really started? I didn't? Okay, let me tell you the joke that Jesus played on us. So we're getting a little cocky, right? I mean, we're with Jesus for a while now, and some of us are now apostles who just completed their first mission. We're liking where this whole thing is going. If we can just ride this out. We got in on the ground floor. If we can ride this out all the way to the end, we can now be the ones on top, because Jesus is going to give us his inner circle. Jesus is going to give us the best positions when he takes power. We just got to ride it out. We were nervous about getting kicked off this gravy train. Can't look like we're too slow to catch on, or else Jesus might kick us out because we're slowing things down. And the day comes when the troops have amassed. We knew things were about to really get started. We hadn't seen anything yet. So let me tell you, dude, the crowds were insanely large, ready to be led in the march on Jerusalem to overthrow Rome. Jesus starts speaking to them in parables. And we're thinking he's messing the whole thing up. Just like the crowds. We don't understand these parables either. But we have to keep up appearances, right? Like we don't want to be kicked out. I can't let Jesus see me struggling, or he might leave me behind. Besides, we figure it's all good. We will ask our teacher a little thought-provoking question. A gently put, redirecting inquiry to make him think about what he's doing, and to get him to stop with the parables and to recapture the power of the mob. We figure Jesus asks questions like this all the time. Can't be that hard. So during a break, we come up with the perfect question. It'll gloss over our own lack of understanding. It'll refocus Jesus on the crowd. It'll get him to change up his approach a bit. and we can light off this revolution. We simply ask Jesus to consider, why is he speaking to the crowd in such parables? We should have known things were wrong when he didn't respond to our question with a question. This is one of the rare times that Jesus gives a direct answer. That's not normal. We should have realized something was up. Right off the bat, he totally buys into the assumption that we had hoped to create. That we're full of understanding. He praises us for just how full of understanding we really are. Jesus says, you guys are awesome because I don't even have to really teach you guys. You guys are understanding stuff that even some of the greatest people through history didn't understand. But the crowds aren't nearly as wise as you guys. So I have to use the parables for them. You see, Jesus told us, you see, the parables are for those who are not understanding, especially for the ones who think they are understanding, but aren't. Do you know what Jesus said to us next? After saying the parables are for the ones without understanding, Jesus tells us, the disciples, so let me redirect you back to this parable. No kidding, dude. Jesus had a little smirk on his face when he says, the parables are for the one who lack understanding. So let me direct you, my disciples, back to my parables. We didn't catch it at first. But then Jesus goes on after the sower parable, and he says, let me tell you another parable. A few of us kind of started to catch on to what was happening. The rest caught on when then Jesus says, and let me tell you a third parable. Jesus wasn't snookered. Jesus knew what was going on. As I finished writing my message last week, I still wonder just how long it took for the first disciple to let out a groan at the realization that their rabbi had just schooled them. When we get to the other side of these parables, we're going to explore this more. For today, I enjoyed Jesus playing a little joke on his disciples, letting the students think that they had sold their teacher a lie, when really he was baiting them into his own lesson. And we consider what I believe is a very important point, that the parables are Matthew's starting point for the church. The church is established on being led to understand that we understand nothing apart from Jesus. Our journey begins, and actually it will continually return us to meeting Jesus in the place of no answers. It is the place of waking up to understanding that I understand nothing. This is the place of parables. You're going to hear the kids come back in as we bring this around to reflection on Matthew's gospel. At the core of Matthew's gospel, it is the lesson to start with nothing. Don't fake what you don't have. Matthew centers his gospel on the idea that to get to know Jesus, you must first understand that you understand nothing. That's where understanding begins. And then you let Jesus begin to impart his wisdom. You don't let the world impart theirs, because the world is about us against them. And the church likes to embrace very often the worldly thinking. That's why the church likes to see a parable about different soils and say, oh, we feel secure because we're in our good soil. And look at the bad ones with bad soil. That's worldly wisdom. Jesus' wisdom causes us to think a little more deeply. Jesus' wisdom might be, as we looked at last week, that each of us is a field. And within each of us is all the soils. And one day I'm the person where the seed finds a good spot to grow. And on other days, I'm the person where the seed can't find a place to thrive. That might be Jesus' wisdom. But maybe Jesus' wisdom in the parable is simply for me to see how quickly do I embrace turning this parable into something about me versus them. Or maybe the wisdom of Jesus in this parable is that when I come up with my answer, what I think is a better answer, how prideful do I feel over those who I think don't have the right answer? Maybe the lesson of the parable is that no matter what I think it means, no matter what answer I come with, how prideful do I feel? How much does pride well up in me when I feel like I mastered Jesus' words because I do have an answer? Maybe the lesson of the parable is that when I'm left unable to know the answer for sure, do I just throw my hands up in despair and leave? Or maybe the lesson of the parable is that as I can hold on to Jesus, even when I don't have an answer, do I feel prideful about my ability to hold on against them, the ones who fall away because they can't endure not knowing? Do I feel better about the success of my strength when I compare it to the failure of others in their weaknesses? I don't know what the wisdom of Jesus is in the parable. But I do know that wrestling with it makes me wiser. Mostly, it makes me wiser as to who I am.